We're continuing in Genesis, going to our principles and precedents, number 4 kind of thing. We're going to go into Genesis 3 tonight. We've been in Genesis 1 and 2 where we said that Genesis 1, obviously creating days, it's about time, and Genesis 2 was about the place, the garden. We walk away from Genesis 1 and 2 with the idea that we are the place, the temple. Our fellowship and communion with God is 24/7. So we're moving into Genesis 3, moving on from that kind of idea that the place, the temple, and the time 24/7 has been established. But what is it? What's it about? And we've been saying it for years, everybody in this room, that it's not religion, it's relationship. And basically, when religion replaces relationship, which we said about Genesis 1 and 2, religion says there's certain times. God says it's all the time. Religion says it's a certain place. God says you're the place, you're the temple. So when religion replaces relationship, looking at relationship tonight, that's when you get systems, times, places that are acceptable instead of love and what I call likeness, which we'll see what I mean by that a bit tonight. In Genesis 2:4, we read this a couple of times over the last couple of weeks, but it's worth reading one more time. It's kind of like a turning point for Moses. Remember, Moses is the one who's writing Genesis, and it's kind of like a turning point where it's all about God. He's going to shift to humanity. And he's going to shift from referring to God, Elohim, all the time, God, God, God. All of a sudden, when he shifts to humanity, his reference to God is the Lord God, which to us we'd say, well, yeah, but throughout the whole, what's the difference between God and the Lord God? Yeah, for Moses, when he uses Lord God, remember where the name Lord comes in. It comes in at the point with Moses himself at the burning bush when he asks, who should I say sent me? What's your name, basically? And that's where we get the name Lord. Say, okay, what's your point? I believe Moses' point is that he knew the Lord who was compassionate, slow to anger, who was there to minister to his people, the intimate God, if you would. He was his Lord. God, the one who's doing all the creating in Genesis 1. He's God. And what Moses is saying is, now that we get to the story of humanity, let's see how this thing pans out. And let's see how the Lord God, the compassionate God, not just the creator, but the compassionate one who has mercy on man. Let's see how the Lord God is involved in humanity. Would you read that 4th verse of the 2nd chapter?
This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made earth and heaven.
Anybody notice something a little bit? As far as Moses is concerned, he's completed the story of God making the heavens and the earth. Here's the account of when the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. He turns it around. He's now telling the story from a different side. He's told the first side from heaven's side. Now he's telling the story from earth's side. And who he wants us to know is not just God the Creator. It's very impressive, I might add. But he wants us to know the Lord God. Because I'm going to tell you something. Before the story's over, as you're going to see, you're going to need to know the Lord God, the compassionate one, who says, I've heard your cries. I've seen what's been going on, and I've come. These are things that when we're reading quickly in the Bible, we don't usually pick up on. So we see Moses doing this. And it's really kind of cool because you remember as God is creating everything, and he's talking about them reproducing according to their own kind. That phrase is used I don't know how many times in the first chapter. Whether it's talking about fruit trees or whether it's talking about animals, they replicate themselves according to their own kind. So if a dog is pregnant, none of us in this room would think that a fish is going to come out. It's about as predictable as it gets. It's not prophecy. They're laws. So we're going into Genesis 2 with some pretty good predictable things. When you think of Genesis 3, I know you know the story of Genesis 3. We generally call it the fall for whatever reason. What is 1 or 2 words that may come to mind immediately? It's kind of funny because everybody's doing what I would expect and what I would do probably or would have done, that are immediate when we hear Genesis 3, we don't think necessarily good things. We've been taught to think, oh boy, there it is. There's the problem right there, Genesis 3. They screwed up, and for the next 4,000 pages, what a mess. Because we are living out the consequences of Genesis 3. So I don't have a problem with that. But something that God does going into Genesis 3, as we finish Genesis 1, he's made man in his image and likeness. And in Genesis 2, we see the man and the woman who have been made in the image and likeness of God in the most beautiful place. And as we go into Genesis 3, we're still in that beautiful place. And because they've been made in the image and likeness of God, we've got a couple who are one. The two became one, it says. But as two, it's like, okay, now what will they do with their ability to make choices? What will they do with their free will? How will they make decisions? See, because if we're made in the image and likeness of God, God made a choice. God made a decision. According to his own will, he decided what he would do when those who were made in his image and likeness would exercise the most precious thing we have is our free will, our ability to make choices and decisions. That is, after everybody lists all kinds of godlike qualities, that is numero uno. We make decisions how we will react and respond when misunderstood, when being abused. God has given us the authority on this planet to make choices, to make decisions, because we have a free will. And it's like the story is now going to be poured out. So from the very beginning of humanity, what did they do with it? If you're with me on this. And as we go into Genesis 3, there's deception, there's disobedience, there's sin, and death enters the world. Augustine, some would call it original sin. We get to the bottom line, what did man do with their free will? Which is really a sad commentary when you think about it. Because this most precious, godlike gift was used in a very human way. I'm not even going to say ungodly, because I'm tired of that kind of language, quite frankly. I think what we did was we used it in a very human way. Just like we raise children, and as children they don't act like adults. As children, it's the funniest thing. They act like children. And all these precious things that you give them, they literally stomp on, they destroy, because they're so wicked. No, they're children, and they're learning about how precious the gift is that you may be giving them. So, I don't know how many conversations I've been in over the last 30 to 40 years about free will. Why does God give people choice? All this kind. It's like he can't win, if you know what I mean. If he doesn't give us a free will, he's a dictator. If he gives us a free will, why does he do that? It's like, well, make up your mind. What do you want to be, a puppet or a person? As far as God was concerned, he says, I just want to make him in our image and likeness. Give them the ability to make choices, decisions, and free will. Why? What is so precious about that? Because at the heart of love, you can never make anybody love you. And if anybody's going to love one another, it's going to be by choice. It'll never be by command. That's why it bothers me so much when people say, they talk about love as a commandment. Yeah, it is. God did give us a commandment to love one another. I get that. But the bottom line of love is making a choice. Free will is absolutely necessary for experiencing love and loving. We said that in Genesis 2, it's put in love terms. He took the man like, do you take this man to be your lawful wedded husband? I just want you to, bear with me a bit, because tonight the real thing that we're going to be looking at is decisions. And I'm hoping some good tools for making good decisions. When we go into Genesis 3, kind of what I hear is God saying, you've got a lot of choices to make on earth as my children. I love you. The reason why over the years I've warned parents, be very careful with your children. Unbelievably careful, because I'm going to tell you something. When your children are little, the way you are and the way you react and respond with them, they are going to process completely different than what you mean. And as they're processing it, there's going to be a devil in a tree. And he's going to be saying, you know why mommy said that. Because mommy doesn't like you. Now you must know that by now. And that liar is working overtime. And I warn parents.
I'm so happy to hear you say that.
I am telling you that when that kid goes into the room, when we say, go to your room, it's one of the worst places we can send them. Because we're sending them right into the garden alone. They go in there, they start to cry, they start to get upset because they cannot process what's going on. And the enemy is right there to say, well, let me show you how to process this. That as we start to develop our own personality and decide, I know to be like God means to make my own choices. I've got the power to make choices and make decisions, not realizing that really God is right there to help us in every one of them. Any father or mother who leads their children down the path of, why don't you grow up and learn how to make up your own mind? Is that what you really want? Is them to throw everything out the window and make up their own mind, figure it all out? I hope not. I hope that instead what we're doing is we're saying, listen, as long as you're walking with me, you don't need to know the difference between good and evil. You just need to listen to me. Until such time, the nurturing has come to a point where you can make your own decisions because you've learned enough. This is, to me, is what's all kind of like behind this whole story. It all has to do with decisions and choices. And I think the bad decision starts when Adam is looking at all the animals, but there's not a helper found for him. There's not a mate found for him. When God never told him to look for one. All he had to know was God would pick up on the fact this is not a good situation. It's not good for man to be alone, because he starts to wander towards things that he shouldn't be wandering towards. He's gravitating towards things that will not be helpful. It's kind of interesting that in that place of God saying, it is not good for man to be alone, that's exactly where the serpent comes after the woman, kind of thing. Adam's right there, but somehow he isolates her. Because he's paying attention. He may be insane, but he's not stupid. And he was paying more attention than Adam was as to what happens to somebody when they're alone, when they're separated. That's really I've got 6 thoughts here regarding decisions that I hope will be helpful to us. And that's the first one, actually. It is not good for man to be alone. In our decisions, in our choices, there is no reason for any of us to feel alone in our choices. In fact, it's not good. And number one, as far as I'm concerned, not number one in importance, just number one on my list here, when we make decisions apart from each other. After Adam and Eve make decisions, act apart from each other, so to speak, they're one, everything is together, they get to Genesis 3, something happens separately, and then from that point on, God is dealing with them separately, as you know from the rest of the story. Their actual condition, Genesis 2, they're naked and there's no shame. Genesis 3, they're naked and they're self-conscious, they're self-aware. Genesis 2, there's no shame. They're covered with the robe of righteousness, which is why there's no shame. They don't see their nakedness because they're covered in God. Genesis 3, they basically lose that covering, if you would, and they see their nakedness. The second thing I want to say about making decisions is that we remain naked in our choices without shame, without fear, without blame. Now, what I'm really talking about, we make choices all the time. I'm not talking about what to have for lunch. Hopefully, instead of what could be sounding as just like a moaning session, and we're whining and complaining and the whole thing, that we're actually listening to each other, praying together, believing God to give us ways of dealing with people in situations. In other words, we've taken number one on board pretty good.